Sir, sir, before starting, please start the recording.
Yeah, so Shivam will start the recording.
Okay, sir.
So when we'll start, we'll start the recording as well. So let me just continuous. Can you see this by the way?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Maybe we can start. Okay, it's 3:05. So let's start. So Shivam, maybe you can start the recording. Okay. And again, the problem is it will stop after 40 minutes. So because it's not a paid account, we are still waiting for that. And you have to also bear with the fact that my network connection will drop sometime. So you have to wait again. Okay. Is that okay? Any question from introductory discussion that we had last time? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Can you see this slide?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so what we have discussed last time is this. So discuss review the postulate of quantum mechanics, right? Namely the non-relativistic quantum mechanics. Why non-relativistic? We should actually go back and see. There is nothing non-relativistic about the postulate of the quantum mechanics. The only part where the non-relativistic nature enters is actually through the Hamiltonian, right? Through this equation, I h cross del psi del t, h cross psi. All other postulates were more or less independent of the fact that whether it's relativistic or not, the system is relativistic or not. It may not be consistent with if you incorporate relativity, that's a different issue. But the postulate itself, apart from that, the time evolution of the system is governed by this Schrodinger equation. Apart from this particular issue, there was no other, everything was purely mathematical, right? Means the probability the system should be described by a wave function or a state vector, and the mod square of it will give you the probability. So we interpreted the mod square to be probability, or postulated that. It has nothing to do with the relativity. And also the eigenfunction, eigenvalue equation, all these things, completeness relation, these are all mathematical things, and it should still hold actually. And so there is nothing relativistic about none of this postulate. The only place where we should doubt that it might be true only in case of non-relativistic quantum mechanics, which is this one. Just a minute. Okay, so sorry for this. So now, so we'll assume that all those postulates will still be consistent in relativistic quantum mechanics as well, as it should be. So only place where we should doubt this postulate is this particular equation. Okay, and the doubt can be of two types. One is this. So we'll still assume, means we can still assume that this equation as it is has nothing to, whether it's relativistically covariant or not, or Lorentz covariant or not. To do that, you need to see how the time coordinate, how the spatial coordinate changes with Lorentz transformation and so on, right? If there are any other quantities that transform under Lorentz transformation, how do they change and all these things. So to check that thing in a better way, we should it's better to go back to a particular representation, for example, in position basis, and you can check. And in non-relativistic quantum mechanics, this h will be p square by twice m, so it will be grad h cut square grad square by twice m, right? And you'll see this, there is a del del t and there is a grad square on the right hand side. So the time appear on one side is as first derivative, and on the right hand side it will have second derivative of this with respect to its position, right? So it's not manifestly Lorentz invariant, and also it may not be Lorentz covariant also. Means you can explicitly check whether you can assign some transformation property to psi, so that you make the whole Schrodinger equation in non-relativistic case for free particle as Lorentz covariant. So this is an exercise that I'll leave it up to you actually to check. We'll discuss that in the tutorial. But the conclusion is that it's not possible. Okay, so you should come with that conclusion, or maybe you can come with the conclusion that it's possible. So that will be also fantastic. So, but the point is, if you have to assume some form of the Hamiltonian, then you can say that okay, if the Hamiltonian is p square by twice m, then it will be grad square, so it will not be Lorentz covariant because there is a del del t and there is a grad square. So right, so unless you assume something, or you know how H transform under Lorentz transformation, that at this level you don't know. That can be also done. So how this H transform under, or how H should transform under Lorentz transformation, you can also, and that will also depend on whether it is relativistic Hamiltonian or non-relativistic Hamiltonian, right? So we'll not go into that details, how this H transform. We'll come to this thing later on actually, how this H transform under Lorentz transformation. Okay, it will depend on what type of Hamiltonian you are considering. So as this equation as such, you don't know whether it's Lorentz covariant or not, unless I give you the H, let's say, and if you assume the H to be p square by 2sm, it is not Lorentz covariant, right? Because you're already assuming a non-relativistic form of the Hamiltonian. So it is not expected to be Lorentz invariant under Lorentz transformation. But what happens if I just substitute H to be this, the relativistic form of the Hamiltonian, right? We know the E is p square. By the way, I'll be very, maybe I still will use the H cross and C, all this thing. I was supposed to remove that today, but anyway. So I'll still keep this C and H cross, but sometime onward, maybe from Dirac equation onward, I'll remove all this C and H cross, okay? Because in this relativistic quantum mechanics and in quantum field theory, this H cross and C will always be there in every equation. So it's better to assume them to be 1. So we'll choose a different unit in which they are 1 actually. So we need not to bother about them. Okay, so I'll discuss that also. But for the moment, I keep that. So your energy momentum relation in relativity is E square equal to p square c square plus m square c to the power 4. If you take a square root of that, right? So there will be two kind of possible square root. One is positive and one is negative. So you already assuming that H is square root of this thing, right? Means you are assuming E to be plus square root of p square c square plus m square c to the power 4. So if you assume this is your energy momentum relation, then your corresponding Hamiltonian means you just need to promote all of them to be operators. So this is H operator and there is this P operator, right? So your Hamiltonian in relativity will be this thing. So you can still assume the Schrodinger equation is still true. So then we can take two viewpoints, that this equation is still true, will still hold in relativistic quantum mechanics, but the form of the H will be different. That is one viewpoint. Or you can take completely drastic viewpoint that this equation is not will not work. We need a different equation in relativistic quantum mechanics. These are the two viewpoints we can take, right? Keeping all other postulates intact. So the better, then see what happens if I just replace this H by this one, and then see whether things are consistent or not. If not, then we can go back. We can think of a different equation, right? But finding a different equation is not at all easy. You have to find something, or you have to build something from the known facts, right? So that's a different job. So let's do it with this Hamiltonian. So if I just substitute this Hamiltonian in this equation, so this is your Schrodinger equation, but with H replaced by this relativistic form of it. Okay. Just a minute, there is a call from university. Just a minute. Yeah. Yeah, I'm just teaching right now.
Hello.
Hi. Yeah.
Oh,
So,
hello.
yeah.
Someone Autonomy is trying to get into the meeting, but you have to accept.
Okay. Shivam, is there any request?
No, it's an open room where anyone can enter. So can you just forward the mail that I sent you to that person, because I sent it to everyone.
Yeah, it should be with him also.
All the email IDs were there. So let me just see it once again. Can you tell me the name of the person?
Yeah, Autonomanna.
Okay, I have given the person the. I've sent. Let me just send it once again.
The meeting is not locked yet, right?
No, sir. No, it's an
Yeah.
open meeting, so anyone can enter it who has the link.
Okay. So, shall we continue?
Yes, yeah.
Yes.
Or wait? Yeah. So you take this equation. This is means operator equation, right? Means this is also operator equation, but it's independent of any basis, right? By the way, I again I should make this point. So when I'll be writing this in some basis, I'll use this. For example, in position basis, I'll use explicit psi xt. And if I am working with independent basis, for example, like this one, then I should use actually the psi state vector. Okay. But sometimes I'll be using simply psi, and you have to assume which context I'm using. If I am using in this kind of equation, then the psi is basically a state vector. If I am using this in this kind of equation, because it may not be always possible to put this x and t, because this makes things a bit clumsy. We'll see later on also. If I just write this psi here, just without the xt in this equation, you should assume that this is in position basis. Okay, so I'll do it once or twice, maybe in few equation, but then I have to drop off this explicit x and t some later on. Okay. So from the context of the equation, you should assume that this is, because this is only possible in position basis, this grad square. Okay. So when there is a grad square kind of thing, you should assume that this psi is actually in position basis. If there is no grad square or something, if there is a p operator, then you should think this psi is independent of this. It's not in any particular basis right now. Okay. I hope this you already know. Anyway, so in position basis, this equation takes this form, right? Means the speed will be actually grad square. This p square will be actually h cut square grad square, and the c square is there. There will be minus sign because p is actually minus I h cross grad, so p square is thus h minus h cross grad square, and then m square c to the power. This is your equation, right? And you can immediately see that this equation is a bit problematic, but it's not that it's mathematically wrong, but it's problematic in a sense that there is a square root and there is the operator inside the square root. And if we expand this square root, it will be actually it will be a power series, right? It will have actually all possible powers of the spatial derivative. Grad square means it will be grad square to the power 4, and so on. All possible power. And solving a differential equation of that kind with means infinite order, an infinite number of powers of gradient operator, it's not a very easy job to do. And also you need infinite number of boundary conditions to solve this kind of equation. So this is not a very attractive way of going to a relativistic quantum mechanics. Okay, and also even if you do that, you'll see that there'll be powers of grad square operators. So the problem will still be there. There is a del del t on this side, and there will be grad square means x del x square del x square del y square, okay, del z square, and their power of these things. Okay, so the time and space will be still in different footing, right, in this equation. And whereas the Lorentz, to get a Lorentz covariant equation, the time and space should be on same footing. So if you have del t on this side, you should have actually del x or gradient operator on this side. Simply gradient, no power of x. If that is not there, then this equation doesn't treat x and t on same footing, right? And it will be difficult to maintain Lorentz covariance unless you treat t and x on same footing. So this kind of equation and the non-relativistic equation also, where you have p square by twice m, when you replace p square by grad square, you have grad square on this side and you have del t on this side. And that equation is expected not to have Lorentz covariance. By same logic, this equation also is not expected to be Lorentz covariant because you are not treating del t and del x or del r on same footing. Okay. Apart from the difficulty that it's difficult to handle this kind of equation. Okay. So what is the way forward then? So this doesn't work, right? Assuming that this is the equation and this is your Hamiltonian doesn't work. So better we can do something else. By something else, maybe we need to consider a defined equation. But who will give that equation? That's one issue. So one thing that you can do is you can go to a version where there is a square operator, right? If instead of h there is a h square, then this square rule will not be there, right? But then I have to somehow see that this on this side also gets squared by some way, right? So how to do that actually? So the way to do this is this. For example, if you have two operators a and b which commute with each other, means a b commutator is 0, and they satisfy this kind of equation, a psi equal to b psi, then this will imply automatically that a square psi is also equal to b square psi. It's very straightforward, you can check. Means you take this equation, operate on by a throughout, you will get a square psi equal to ab psi. You take this equation, you operate by b throughout, you will get ba psi will be equal to b square psi. And if your ab equal to ba, which is true if a and b commutes, then a square psi will be equal to b square psi, right? So given this equation, you can just equivalently also work with this equation, because this simply doesn't imply that. This two fact imply this. So you have to just see whether a and b commutes or not. So what is a and b? So you have on this side you have del t, and on this side you have gradient operator. And del t and gradient operator commutes with each other, right? One acts on x, right? The gradient operator doesn't commute with x only. It commutes with t. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this operator and this operator will commute with each other. So this is my a, del ih cross del t is my a, and this side is my b. This whole square root operator is my b. So since they commute, then their square is also, means this equation I can immediately write down, right? A square psi equal to b square psi, because this follows from this. So I do that. I just square them actually. Means I have ih cross del t, that square of that operator will be minus h cut square del t2 acting on psi. And the square of the right hand side operator, which is this, will be just simply this operator without the square root. So this operator without the square root just simply look like this. And you see now we have the time and spatial derivative on same footing, right? It is del 2 del t2, and in this grad square operator you have del 2 del x2 del 2 del y2 and del 2 del z2. All of them are same footing, and there is no other x and t in this operator, and only x and t involved in this psi x3. That's it. So this is your new equation, right? If you bring everything on this side, this will be this is not a Schrodinger equation, because here you do not have ih cross del t, you have instead del 2 del t2 actually. The grad square is still there. So this is no longer your Schrodinger equation. This is the equation of this type actually, of this type perhaps. Let me check. What is that? Yeah, this is the equation of this type. Minus h cut square del 2 psi del t2 equal to h cap h hat square psi. It's not Schrodinger equation. Okay, I'll come to that form later on, but anyway. So this is my equation, and now I can introduce this notation called the Allen-Barchian operator, which is just simply this 1 by c squared del 2 del t2 minus grad squared, this box operator. Okay, so if I write in terms of that, this is my box plus this whole thing square acting on psi xt is 0. Okay? And in fact, if I assume c and h plus to be 1, then this will be just simply box plus m square acting on psi xt is 0. And this is the famous equation, it's known as Klein-Gordon equation, and this is the first relativistic quantum mechanical equation, which is manifestly Lorentz covariant. Okay, but whether it's this is a consistent quantum mechanical single particle quantum mechanical equation or not, that we have to see. Okay, so you have to go back and check the probabilistic interpretation, the conservation of total probability, okay, and all these things. Is this okay? This Klein-Gordon form of this Klein-Gordon equation?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yes.
Okay. So we'll come back to this equation many times. Okay. So this is a very important equation. Even though we'll see that this is still not make sense, but this is still an important achievement in terms of Lorentz covariant form of a quantum mechanical type of equation. Okay. So let's see the probabilistic interpretation in this kind of equation. Okay, so how do you do that? So let's just briefly see how do you do it in non-relativistic quantum mechanics. So we have this equation in non-relativistic quantum mechanics, right? IH cross del psi del t for free particle equal to minus h square by twice m grad square psi xt. You have this equation. So what you do, you just take the complex conjugate equation. So on this side you have a minus sign del IH cross del psi star del t. And on this side you have minus h square grad square psi star xt. You multiply by psi star this equation from left, by psi from right this equation. By the way, this doesn't make a difference because unless the operator acts on this, the operator doesn't act on. If I multiply by psi this equation from right, the operator will still act on this. I have to put a bracket here, just like here, and the psi will be multiplied by from right. Okay. And this doesn't make a, if I actually multiply this equation by psi from left also, it would have been simply perfectly okay. And in fact, in many books, you'll see that this has been done, means psi star multiplied by from left with this equation throughout, and psi multiplied from left with this equation throughout, and you subtract that. This is perfectly valid, but you should keep in mind that this may not be always true because for example, in case of Dirac equation, we'll see that we have to do it from right. Okay, and this is always better to do. So you should do it from right for the complex conjugate equation, because when sometimes here actually this psi is just a single component wave function, but sometimes this psi can be a column vector or a row vector. Okay, and they do not just simply cannot be actually means. They do not commute with each other. You cannot just take one psi and commute with take it on the other side. Means, okay, so I cannot just, in this case, I can just take this psi and put it on this side. Okay, it's simply they commute, means this psi star or del psi star del t commutes with this psi. Okay, but if this is a vector, row vector, or this is a column vector, then this is the inner product. You cannot just take this on this side. Okay, if there's some vector, and it will be a, you'll see in Dirac equation case this is very much true. Here it doesn't matter. Okay, so you just multiply that and subtract, and you will see this is your equation. Okay, and I guess you already know this kind of equation. This is what equation this will give us. If I do this and simplify it, what kind of equation you will get by this method? Have you seen this kind of equation?
Continuity equation.
Yeah, so this is called the continuity equation. Means, in fact, this is a consequence of the equation of motion, right? Someone was saying that this psi is continuous. In fact, psi is continuous is a consequence of the equation of motion. And in fact, the derivative of psi may or may not be continuous depending on the equation. Okay. Okay, so let me see what I was trying to do. Yeah, so I have this thing. So this side, what I did here. Okay, so I just wrote it in this way: IH cross del del T. This is non-relativistic quantum mechanics. Okay, IH cross del del T of psi star psi. On this side, you have minus h cross square by twice m, and you take this divergence operator common, and inside the bracket you will have this. Right? If you just break this, you will see this is equivalent to this thing. Okay. You bring all of them together on one side. Okay, and call this psi star psi. Let's call this psi star psi to be my probability density. If I interpret my psi star psi, the meeting has been upgraded for unlimited time. Okay, so we will not stop actually today. So the psi star psi, if you interpret this as a probability density, and then this is your probability current density, then this gives a continuity equation of this type: del rho del T plus divergence of J equal to 0, right? In fact, you can also check from this equation that your probability will be, the total probability will be conserved. Means you just integrate this equation throughout whole space, okay, or the volume over which the system is described. And you will see that it will also give you the integration over dv rho is conserved. Okay, so this is this is a local conservation equation. Okay, and this is a consequence of actually a global continuous symmetry. And this maybe is not very, I don't know whether you know that or not, but even if it's not very familiar to you, we'll actually consider this kind of things many times in this course. Okay, so I'll come back to this fact: what is the meaning of global continuous symmetry? And in fact, this is this global continuous symmetry due to which there is a conservation law. Okay, you are perfect. Already perhaps you have learned this in classical mechanics, that given a continuous symmetry, there exists a conserved Noether current, right? Due to Noether's theorem. It's exactly the same thing. There is a conserved quantity, right? The total probability is conserved. So there must be some symmetry, continuous symmetry corresponding to that, right? So there is a global continuous symmetry which is responsible for this conservation law. And the hermiticity of H that we discussed last time, that Hamiltonian is Hermitian, that's why there is a the probability is conserved, is actually intermittently linked to this statement. Okay. By the way, what is this global symmetry? Do you know? Even if you do not know that, it's perfectly fine. But I'm just asking. So, you know that there's a conserved charge, right? So there must be some symmetry, continuous symmetry. Do you know that symmetry? That the equation, Schrodinger equation has? Or if you write down the Schrodinger equation in a Lagrangian formalism, there will be a symmetry of that Lagrangian. So either you can think of in terms of Lagrangian, or you can think of in terms of Schrodinger equation itself.
Time inversal symmetry.
Time reversal symmetry is a discrete symmetry, right? It's not a continuous symmetry. Yeah, so the global symmetry is this. Exactly, very good. Who said that?
Sankho.
Yeah, so you take this equation, right? Phase transformation, but what kind of phase transformation? If you do the phase transformation with the constant parameter, right? Means, let me explain this maybe. What is that? Just a minute. Yeah. So you have this equation, right? Can you see this whiteboard? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I have this equation, right? We'll discuss a lot of these things in this course. And symmetry will play an important role in this course, okay? So let me not bother about this I, H cross and all this thing, but I still put the I, H cross I can forget. So you have this grad square operator, right? Grad square by twice m psi. Let's assume H cut is 1. That this whole thing is independent of that. If I change my psi with a phase, right? What kind of phase? Let's say to the power I alpha. Times psi. When this if I substitute this psi, this is phase transformation, right? If I substitute instead of psi, if I substitute this thing, is this equation still satisfied? Will this be a solution of this equation? Means if I replace this psi by psi prime, and my psi prime is this, some phase multiplied by the original psi.
Yes.
Will the psi prime be a solution of this equation?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
The phase will cancel out.
Yeah, so the phase will only cancel out if alpha is independent of space-time, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
If it is if alpha is not a function of space-time, then only it's true, right? If it's a constant parameter. Is this okay? So alpha should be constant, independent of x time, constant parameter. Then it's true. Anyway, it take much time to write actually, but anyway, parameter. Okay. So that's why I'm calling it, since it's independent of x and t, that's why so what you are doing, psi is actually a function of x and t, right? But you are multiplying psi with a phase e to the power I alpha. So basically what you are doing is this. So your psi prime xt, x is, there is a vector symbol, but let's not bother about that. So you are doing this. You are taking your original psi and multiply this by a phase e to the power I alpha, which is constant throughout. Constant throughout means it's same at all space-time coordinate, right? So psi is a field, means it depends on x and t. So at every space-time point, you are multiplying this psi by same phase, right? So basically, it's kind of a constant rescaling of the psi, right? By a phase. Means you're multiplying at all space-time. So psi takes various values at various space-time point. All those values get rescaled by a constant phase, e to the power I alpha. That's why you call it a global phase transformation. It's a global phase transformation. Okay, it's same at every space-time point. It's global in this sense. Instead, you could have actually worked with a alpha, which is actually function of space-time, and then you'll see that this equation is not invariant, because if alpha is function of space-time, then the equation is not invariant. We have to modify this equation in certain way that it's actually invariant. In fact, you have to just introduce the gauge field, for example, electromagnetic field in this equation, and you'll see that then this equation will be invariant equation. Okay, so this is completely different thing. We'll see this thing later on. And in that case, it will be actually not a global transformation. It will be a local transformation if your alpha depends on space-time. Means at every space-time point, you are multiplying by a different phase, right? Because alpha will depend on space-time coordinate, right? So every space-time point, you are multiplying by a different phase. This kind of transformation we'll call local transformation, and this kind of transformation where alpha is constant throughout space-time is called global transformation. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Sir, what is the Noether current corresponding to this?
Yeah, this Noether current is this, right? This is the Noether current. This is J, right?
Yes.
So J mu will be just your J mu will be just this thing. Let me just add text. If you have J mu, that will be rho comma the vector J. Okay, means the special component of this thing. So this will be the full 4 vector conserved quantity. Okay, means the conserved current actually. But the conserved quantity will be the time component integrated over the full volume, right? Which is actually rho integrated over dx. That will be your conserved quantity, the total probability actually. Right? But the conserved current is this whole combination, the J and rho. Means we call it a 4 current, but the current density is this one and the density is this one. So, okay. Is this okay? Okay. So given this equation, you can check that this equation has a continuity equation, satisfy a continuity equation, and corresponding to this continuity equation, you have a conservation law, because whenever there is a continuity equation, you know that there is a conservation, right? You have to just integrate this equation over full volume, right? And this thing will drop out because there is a divergence, so you can convert the volume integral into a surface integral. And if your psi falls off at the infinities, then this thing will be actually, this thing will give you, the boundary term will not contribute, and it will give you that the rho integrated over full volume is conserved, right? It's the same thing that you have done already, that the total probability is conserved, right? So what this continuity equation suggests is that what is your probability density? That's what it suggests actually. So we have this thing that we can actually interpret psi star psi as a probability, okay? And psi is a probability amplitude. This what it's actually suggests. So if I interpret this as my probability, then the total probability will be conserved, okay? As a consequence of the global symmetry, or just if you have this Hermitian Hamiltonian, then it will be conserved, okay? And one nice feature of this Schrodinger equation was that since we interpret this thing as my probability density, it has a nice feature. This is positive definite, right? So and this is inconsistent with the fact that probability is always positive definite. Means it can be 0 to 1, or principle normalized to always between 0 to 1, but it's positive definite. That's the main feature of the probability of something which represent probability or probability density, right? So this is how you do that. So let's see. So this is for Schrodinger equation. So let's take this equation then and see what is whether the psi star psi is still the probability or something else. Okay. So let's check that. So I have this equation. So I'll do the same thing that we have done for non-relativistic quantum mechanics. So I have this equation which is Klein-Gordon equation. Now I'll take a complex conjugate of this equation. Here you can see this is completely real operator. So it's just complex conjugate will be itself. So it will be just the same operator acting on psi stars xt. Okay. So if psi is a solution, psi star is also a solution of the Klein-Gordon equation, right? Whereas this is not true for Schrodinger equation. Now you do the same thing. You multiply it by psi star, this equation by psi star from left, and this equation by psi from right, and then subtract, and you will get this term will cancel because this will be some constant multiplied by psi star psi. This will be also some constant multiplied by psi star psi. They will constant, and we will be left with this thing. Okay. Now we'll explicitly substitute the box operator, and you will get this thing. That there'll be psi star del t2 psi minus del 2 psi star del t2 multiplied by psi, and this thing, all of this comes from this box operator, and you can arrange this in this form: 1 by c square. You can take common. You can take del t common. So inside the del t, you have the psi star del psi del t minus del psi star del t psi, right? And here you have minus divergence of this whole thing, which is exactly the same j that we have found here in the previous example. Okay. It has this h cross multiplied by twice mi to make it have the correct dimension of the current density. But this is exactly the same quantity here also. We get actually, because it's the same thing. You take divergence common, it will give you the same. But the difference is actually here. If it were a single time derivative, del t only, if you take del t outside, it would have been psi star psi. But since there is a double derivative of time, and if you take del t common, it will be just psi star del psi del t minus del psi star del t psi, right? And just to make it look like the previous example, the Schrodinger equation case. So and to have the correct dimension of the correct density, I just multiplied by h cross square by twice im throughout. So on this side I have this thing, and this is multiplied by this. So I now interpret. Let's define this to be my rho. Okay, just let's define and see what happened. This to be my rho. This quantity inside a bracket multiplied with this factor is my rho, and this quantity is my j as it is, right? So then the continuity equation will read as del rho del t plus divergence of J equal to 0, right? Again, this is a conservation law, local conservation law. It's also a consequence of a global symmetry. And we'll see that the global symmetry is exactly the same symmetry that we have for the Schrodinger equations. Namely, if you replace psi by e to the power I alpha psi, it will have this symmetry, okay? The constant alpha. But the problem is if we, okay, so one more thing. So this, if you integrate this equation again by the same trick, means if you integrate this equation over whole volume, right, this term will drop off, and then this will be integration dx, d cube x, del t rho of xt, right? So you can take this del t outside because the integration and the del t operator commute. And if you take this del t outside, it will be ddt because integrated quantity means rho xt depends on xt, but if you integrate over x, this only depends on t. So there is no distinction between del t and del ddt. So this will give you conservation law, means this rho will be conserved. So not the rho. The rho integrated over full volume will be conserved. So this quantity will be conserved, right? And in fact, you can check this statement from the hermiticity of this Hamiltonian operator also. So you have this equation, right? H cross square del 2 psi del t2 equal to h square psi, where h square is just simply this thing. Okay, means in the Klein-Gordon equation. This thing. This is your h square. Okay. So if you start from this equation and then do the same trick that we did last time. So you take this equation and then complex conjugation equation, then multiply this by psi star and psi from left and right, blah blah blah, indicate over full volume. You see, as a consequence of the hermiticity of the h square, this is again 0. So this quantity indicated over full volume is actually 0. Okay, so you can take this del t outside, which will become ddt. So ddt of this whole thing is 0. That means this integrated quantity is constant of motion, right? So now if you interpret this to be your probability density, then that probability density will be conserved. That is guaranteed, right? If you interpret this rho to be your probability density, then this quantity will be, total probability will be conserved. But the problem with this thing is that this is not positive definite, right? Is this positive definite by any chance? Is it obvious that whether this is positive definite or not?
Obvious, not obvious.
But it's not positive definite either, because there is this two
Minus sign.
Yeah. So if psi is, for example, real, then it's 0. If psi is not real, then it's actually, it can be positive or negative, whatever. It can be both, right? Because there's a minus sign here.
Yes.
So this is conserved, but this is not positive definite. So the probability will not be positive definite, and it's a huge problem, right? It's not a we need a probability interpretation which is positive definite. So that's the problem, right? But what happens if you say that, okay, let's not interpret this is to be my probability density, but we can still interpret the old psi star psi to be my probability. Okay, this thing. What is that? I forgot to write. Oh, yeah. So we can still work with that rho is, this is not my rho, that rho is psi star psi, right? I can still call that if psi is the solution of the Schrodinger equation, my psi star psi is the probability. I can still assume that, right? Then what will be the problem?
Rho is not conserved, please can.
Yeah, so this will not be conserved, right? Because only this quantity is conserved as a consequence of the equation of motion. This doesn't say that the psi star psi will be conserved. It says that this is conserved. So even if you work with a positive, if you want to work with psi star psi, which is your probability density and psi is your probability amplitude, then the problem is that this is not guaranteed to be conserved. Means even if you normalize it at some instant of time, it will not remain normalized at other instant of time. Okay, so this is as a consequence of the equation of motion. Okay, and it had nothing to do with any other thing. it will not be conserved. So this is a problem, right? So you have been able to do this or find this nice equation, which has a very nice form, very simple structure. It's perfectly Lorentz covariant. But the problem is that even after that, this equation doesn't have a probabilistic interpretation, nice probabilistic interpretation for psi. Okay, so this is a problem in relativistic quantum mechanics. It has one more issue, but I deliberately not mentioning it. Okay, I will come back to that maybe again in the context of Dirac equation. So is this point clear up to this point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So then what is the way out? So neither both of this approach failed, right? Means the completely different equation, which is Lorentz covariant, that failed, or the same Schrodinger equation with relativistic Hamiltonian, that also failed, right? So what we should do? Maybe we can try to find another equation, or maybe we can still stick to the same approach. Means we can still work with the same IH cross del psi del t equal to H psi, this thing, and try to see whether we can find a H which is still relativistic but not quadratic in P but linear in P. That is the target. Okay. If it is linear in P, then P will be replaced by a gradient operator, right? And then there will be first order derivative in time and first order derivative in space also, right? And then it will be symmetric in X and T. X and T will be on the same footing, right? So that this is what we want actually, but yeah. Just one more thing. So by the way, the root of this problem, that the probability density was not positive definite in case of Klein-Gordon equation, is basically this thing, right? That it has a double derivative in time, right? It has second order in time. So we have to somehow forget about this kind of equation where there is a second derivative in time. Because if you have a second derivative, second order time derivative, then it will be never possible to make it a positive definite probability density. Or if you interpret that as your positive, means if you interpret not that is as your probability density something else, then that quantity will not be conserved. Okay, so this quantity will be conserved, but it is not positive definite if you work with a second order time derivative. So the best thing is to do is this: you go back to the same Schrodinger format, is that you have a single time derivative. So is means kind of a necessary thing to do almost. Okay. Okay, so let me summarize this: that the Klein-Gordon equation is Lorentz covariant, but it doesn't have a well-defined probabilistic interpretation. However, this is only true in the context of if you interpret the Klein-Gordon equation as a single particle quantum mechanical equation. Okay, if you interpret this equation in that way, or if you look at this equation in that way, like Schrodinger equation, Schrodinger equation is actually for a free particle is a single particle quantum mechanical equation, right? The probability of finding a particle will be conserved. The total probability of finding a particle at any point in space-time will be conserved quantity, right? So if you interpret this Klein-Gordon equation as a single particle quantum mechanical equation, then it's completely wrong. Means you cannot have a consistent probabilistic interpretation. However, we'll come back to this Klein-Gordon equation. And in fact, the half of this course, means mostly half of this course will be actually related to Klein-Gordon equation, and half will be related to Dirac equation. Okay, so we'll come back to this equation in the context of quantum field theory in a thorough way again. And in that context, we'll not interpret this equation as a single particle, relativistic single particle quantum mechanical equation, but we'll try to see it as a relativistic classical field equation, right? Just like your electromagnetic field equation. The electromagnetic field equation is some classical equation. It's not a quantum mechanical equation, right? So we'll actually look at this equation again in the context of quantum field theory, but not as a single particle quantum mechanical equation. And I will emphasize this point also later on. We'll interpret the equation as a simple classical equation, classical field equation, like electromagnetic field equation, and the psi will be treated as a field, simply as a field, not a wave function or a state function or anything, just a field, just like electromagnetic field. Okay, it's just a relativistic field equation. In fact, electromagnetic field equation is also a relativistic field equation. Okay, so we'll take this field equation later on also. and we'll try to quantize them in the context of quantum field theory. But this will come maybe after at least couple of months later. Okay. For the moment, this is the end of the story related to Klein-Gordon equation. And this was the main problem, that this time derivative and x, the del del t and del del x was symmetrical, but that there was second order time derivative, and that was the root problem of not having a positive definite probabilistic interpretation or probability density. So what we'll do, we'll stick to the same format, means IH cross del psi del t is equal to something H psi or maybe something else equal of acting on psi, but let's see what that quantity will be. Okay, so this is the approach that Dirac took, that he didn't like this lack of positive definiteness of the probability density. By the way, just one more thing, let me add one comment here. This can be actually, even if this cannot be interpreted as a probability density, but it can be interpreted as actually a charge density. Means if you multiply this quantity by a charge of the particle, then it can be positive, negative, right? A particle can have positive charge density or negative charge density depending on whether the particle is positive or negative. But again, in the context of single particle, it's not possible. If you have more than one kind of particle which has, for example, let me just make this comment. We'll see that this Klein-Gordon equation will still make some sense in the context of, for example, the pions, whether you have heard the name of that particle or not, pions, which has pi plus, pi minus, pi 0, right? And there are three kinds of pions: positively charged pion, negatively charged pion, and neutral pion. For those kind of particles, this can still make a sense if you multiply this rho by a charge. So in that case, it will be interpreted as a charge density, not as a probability density of finding the particle at some point in space-time. Okay. So yeah, that's all for that thing. So what we'll do, we'll try to come back to this particular format, and this is what actually Dirac wanted to have in order to have a well-defined probability density, probabilistic interpretation of this thing. But the problem is your H is already fixed in relativity, right? It's p square over p square root of p square plus m square, right? The question is, can we linearize this thing? By linearize, I mean, can we write it in something proportional to p plus some constant on whatever it is? Okay, so something like this, is it possible? Okay. The fact is that it can be done, and again, the motivation that Dirac got to linearize this is actually from a very well-known identity that you already know. Let me write down that maybe. By the way, one thing you can check, that in the massless limit, if m is 0, okay, means if the relativistic particle is massless, then it's actually H is actually linear in P, right? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's not that very unusual that relativistic H cannot be linear in P. It can be, and special cases for massless particle, for example. But we are dealing with, for example, let's say electron. And electron is massive. So what to do for electron then? So the point is, it can be actually linearized for massless and massive. For massless is very trivial, but for massive it can be also done. And the motivation is actually this identity. Let me just do that. So you know that we have this thing p square, p1 square. Let's take this quantity. Okay, so forget what we are doing right now. Just completely different thing we want to do right now. So p1 square, p2 squares plus p3 square. Let's take this quantity. Okay, so I have this quantity, and if I ask you what is the square root of that, how do you do that? Is it possible to do the square root of this thing? Hello? Okay. It's possible actually. So let's try to do that. Okay. So you know sigma dot p, right? Have you heard of Pauli matrices?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And I hope you also have seen this identity, right? Sigma dot p whole square. What is this quantity?
P square.
P square. P square means mod p square, right?
Not P square.
And mod p,
It's 4 o'clock.
mod p vector square. And what is this?
P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square.
So same thing, right? P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square. Now if I take the square root on this side, I have to take a square root on this side also, right? So square root of this quantity, or I can write it here. What it will be? Actually sigma dot p, right?
Yes, sir.
So it can be done in principle, right? Is that okay? One thing you should always remember, the technical issue means, in fact, this quantity is not sigma dot p. Okay, what is sigma dot p? Is this means? So sigma dot p whole square is actually mod p square. It's not exactly true that it's mod p square. It's actually mod p square times the identity operator, right?
Yes.
Because this is a 2 by 2 matrix. This is a sigma. There's a matrix on this side. If you square a matrix, it still remains a matrix, right? So on this side, it is a matrix, and on this side, it cannot be a number, right? It should be multiplied by an identity matrix then. So that means it's also in this side, you have an identity matrix. Okay. So basically, square root of this thing multiplied by identity is actually sigma dot p, right? So basically, identity, if you multiply by identity, basically it will be something like this: a square root here, a square root here, on this side, and a 0 here, and a 0 here. Inside a square root, you have this expression here and here, and this quantity is actually your sigma dot p. So you should keep that in mind. Okay, so it's not exactly that this is sigma dot p. This multiplied by identity is sigma dot p. Okay, but the point is, if I have a square root of something like this, p1 square plus p2 square plus p3 square, square root of sum of square of 3 object. If I take a square root of that, I can linearize it in terms of p, right? Sigma dot p. Where the sigmas are actually the Pauli matrices, right? In fact, even if you do not know whether the sigma are Pauli matrices or not, you can simply check. Means if you write this thing in this way, that my square root of this quantity is sigma dot p. Now, if you want to derive what the sigma will be, some sigma or some alpha or some beta, whatever it is, some alpha dot p or some beta dot p or some a dot p, whatever you want to write, and you want to check what, do there exist any a or any sigma that satisfies this relation? The answer will be yes. Means if you have this, you have to check what property this sigma should have. Okay, so you have to, what you have to do, you have to just square both sides. Then you will get this thing. Means sigma I. So sigma dot p is basically sigma I pi. So you need actually 3 sigma, not 1 sigma. At least 3 matrices. Whether 2 by 2 matrices or not, that we don't know, right? It doesn't say it has to be 2 by 2 matrices, right? If you already have a prior knowledge that these sigmas are Pauli matrices, then you know this is a 2 by 2 matrix. But as it is, if I say that this square root of this thing is just some matrix time p, but this matrix needs to satisfy some property. Okay, if I say that, it's what property? So let's evaluate that. So the square of this thing has to be again p1 square plus p2 square plus p3 square, right? So that means if I just square this thing, sigma I pi square, the square of this thing should give me back this expression. So what is the square then? So it is sigma I pi and then what I should do?
Sigma j.
Multiply it. Huh?
Sigma j pj.
Sigma j p. Very good. Not sigma I, because I is a dummy index. So if you want to get this expression, what this should satisfy, sigma I, sigma j, what it has to satisfy? Does this means if this, so what this means, this p1 square, p2 square, p3 square, this is equal to what it has to be. This should give you pi pj, right? Pi, right?
Yes.
Yes.
This should give you pi. So then what property sigma I should have?
Sigma j equals to Kronecker delta ij.
Yeah, not completely true, but partially true. Okay. So this, you are saying that this should imply that this, if the sigma satisfy this property, first of all, sigma is sigma j. If this is your Kronecker delta, ij, I am not giving the dot, it takes time. If this is delta ij, okay, so let's assume that this is true, but this is not completely true, partly true. If this is delta ij, then the sigma, it's the sigma, it's the sigma matrices, whatever, even if it's not a Pauli matrices, if I don't know about them, okay, whatever, even if I don't know, in fact, if they are matrices or not, in fact. If I write this square root, let's say if I write this square root in this way, let's say I assume that it can be linearized, so I just take a square root of that and write it in terms of some object, something, some sigma or some alpha or some beta times dot p. Now only thing that I know that the square of this thing will give me p square, means p1 square plus p2 square plus p3 square, if this object sigma I satisfy only this property, right? Then the square of this thing will give this p1 square plus p2 square plus p3 square, right? Right? If this object satisfy only this property, then this is enough, right? It need not be matrix perhaps. Okay, there may be a matrix representation of this thing, but it in general may not be a matrix, first of all. It may not be in general a 2 by 2 matrix, it may not be in general a Pauli matrices. Only thing that it has to satisfy is this property. And it can be satisfied by many quantities, but matrix is one of the example. 2 by 2 is matrix is one of the special example maybe, and Pauli matrix is even more special example. Because Pauli matrices has even more properties. It is stressless. It satisfies a commutation relation sigma j equal to twice I epsilon ijk sigma k, right? But that is not necessary here, right? I only need this property. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I have to find some sigma that satisfies this relation, right? That is what the job is, and it can be satisfied by many quantities in principle, other than the Pauli matrices. Okay. By the way, just little correction. So this is I am giving it a question mark whether this is true or not. The answer is this is not exactly true, because so this has to be this whole thing has to be pi, right? This whole thing has to be pi. But the point is, you can always write. I have to perhaps open another notebook. So I need to have this thing sigma I, sigma j. Okay, I'm writing capital I, capital J for to avoid this dot, extra dot. Pi, pj. This equal to, this must be, this is my requirement that it should satisfy this thing. If this is true, if I can ensure this, then it's enough. So what property of sigma will ensure that? As someone said, it should be delta ij. But the point is, this quantity, you can write it in this way, right? Half sigma I, sigma j plus sigma j, sigma I is plus half sigma I, sigma j minus sigma j, sigma I, right? I have done nothing actually, just subtracted and added and subtracted something, right? So this is what is multiplied by PIPJ on left hand side. This is multiplied by PIPJ. Is this okay?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
I just took the left hand side, okay, of this equation and wrote this thing because I don't know whether they commute or not. Okay, I just did this thing because I don't know whether this is 0 or not.
So
Sorry?
in right hand side there should be PI.
Yeah, there should be. Thank you. Yeah, I want to get this PI. Okay, and these are J. Okay, so now see, this PIPJ is symmetric in IJ, right? Means if you can interchange these two, PIPJ, they are symmetric in I and J index, right? PIPJ. Is this statement true? Because if you interchange IJ, PIPJ, this quantity, is it symmetric in IJ or anti-symmetric in IJ or nothing?
Symmetric in IJ.
Symmetric. All of you agree with that? If you do not agree, just say. Unless you do not agree, then you can just say that I do not agree or I do not understand the statement. But if you agree, then you don't have to say anything. So, and only one answer is enough. Okay, only reply by any one of you is enough. So PIPJ is symmetric, right? And this combination is symmetric, and this combination is anti-symmetric, right? Now, if you multiply, this is symmetric in IJ. If you multiply this with this, it will be 0 always, right? Because this is symmetric in IJ and this is anti-symmetric in IJ. So this will be 0. So what you will be left with is this multiplied by PIPJ, right? So that should be equal to PIPI. Not the whole thing should be PIPI, right? So any matrix, in fact, this is true for any matrix. So if you multiply any matrix which in general you do not know, symmetric or anti-symmetric, if you do not know, okay. If you multiply that by another matrix, which you know either symmetric or anti-symmetric, let's say, so both of the cases possible. Let's say it's equal to 0. Okay. Suppose this is a non-zero matrix, or all this Bij is non-zero. Okay. For all ij, Bij is non-zero, and let's assume Bij is symmetric in ij, right? Then what can we say about the Aij's? I do not know whether Aij is symmetric or anti-symmetric in Ij. I can only, if this object is symmetric in Ij, I can only constrain the symmetric part of it. I cannot constrain the anti-symmetric part. On the other hand, if this is anti-symmetric in Ij, I can only constrain the anti-symmetric part of it. I cannot constrain the symmetric part, because the symmetric part multiplied by the anti-symmetric Bij will be 0. Anyway, it's 0. So it's independent of what is 0 Aij. Okay. So if it is symmetric, I can only constrain the symmetric part of this matrix. So if it is symmetric and all the elements are 0, then all this Aij, symmetric part of Aij has to be 0. This is the statement. Okay. Is this clear?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, please repeat the statement.
What I'm saying, let's say one of them is not 0, we know that this is not 0, right? The Bij, all the Bij for all Ij is not 0. then I can just simply say all the Aij should be 0, right? In fact, this is the similar statement that someone was making, that this sigma ij should be delta ij, right? In this equation, in this context, what I can say, if all the bij's are non-zero, then all the aij's should be 0, right? For each ij, it should be 0, right?
Yes.
This is anyway. Again, this is not one more thing is there, of course. Yeah. Anyway, so let's not go into that details. What I'm trying to say is this. So you have this matrix Aij, right? And this is non-zero. Okay, this quantity is non-zero, or yeah. So then, what statement you can make about this Aij? What I'm saying, you can only make a statement about this thing, that symmetric part of Aij, that means Aij from this actually, you can only say this Aij plus Aj, because this matrix is symmetric on this thing is zero. This you can at best say. If your Bij is symmetric, then this is a non-trivial statement. I should not say all the Aij should be 0. Means only you can constrain Aij up to this point. This should be your 0. This should be 0. You cannot make any statement about the antisymmetric part of Aij. Is this okay? Because the antisymmetric part of Aij multiplied by the symmetric part means multiplied by the symmetric Bij. Bij is symmetric. I am assuming Bij is symmetric in Ij. If this is true, then I can only say this, that this is 0. Bij equal to Bji. If this is true, if this is true, then you can only make this, from this you can only make this statement, that this multiplied by this will be 0. Because the antisymmetric part, if you write any matrix, you can write always in this way, symmetric plus antisymmetric part. If you write that, the antisymmetric part multiplied by symmetric matrix will be always anyway 0. So you cannot, that will be 0. You cannot constrain any component of A matrix. But only non-trivial constraint will come from the symmetric part of A. Okay. Well, this is a non-trivial statement. This is in general not 0, this product. In general, they are not 0, but this, as a consequence of this equation, this is 0. Okay. This is a non-trivial statement. So the same thing I am saying here means the sigma I sigma j multiplied by pi pj is symmetric in Ij. So when you multiply this, if you write this in this way, in a symmetric and antisymmetric combination, pi pj multiplied by this thing will be 0, because this is antisymmetric in Ij and pi pj is symmetric in Ij. So this is 0. So basically pi pj multiplied by this thing is actually your pi pi, not the whole thing is your pi pi. So this equation only constrain the symmetric part to be pi pi. Okay. Is this statement clear? Means you can only make a statement about this part, not the whole thing from this equation. That's what I'm saying. From this equation, you can only make a statement about what should be the symmetric part. This should be your delta ij. Irrespective of what is this, if this is antisymmetric, whatever matrix you choose, it will be still satisfied. Is this okay or not?
Yes, sir.
Or
Yes, sir.
shall I repeat it again? So again, let me just repeat quickly. See, if my sigma ij is equal to delta ij plus any matrix, antisymmetric matrix, and if my sigma ij is this, if my sigma ij is some delta ij plus some antisymmetric part, whatever antisymmetric, I don't know, means arbitrary antisymmetric part, okay? Then also this will be satisfied, right? Because this PIPJ, when you multiply it with this antisymmetric part, will be 0. Then PIPJ multiplied by this delta ij will be just simply PIPJ, right? So sigma ij itself can have any antisymmetric combination, any antisymmetric part. It may not be only delta ij, that's what I'm saying. So it's wrong to say that the sigma ij will be delta ij. Sigma ij can have any antisymmetric part. Because if you multiply the antisymmetric part with the PIPJ, that will be 0. And you will still get PIPI because delta ij multiplied by PIPJ will be PIPI. But what you can, so you cannot constrain sigma ij as a whole. What you can constrain is actually symmetric part of the sigma ij. This has to be delta ij. This thing has to be delta ij. The symmetric part has no choice. The antisymmetric part can be still any arbitrary thing. But the symmetric part of the sigma ij should be sigma I sigma j, the symmetric combination of it should be delta ij. There is no other option. Is that okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So from this equation, what you can say is that this thing is delta ij. This thing, the symmetric part is delta ij. This is the consequence of this equation. Okay, not the whole thing is sigma ij. And you should keep this in mind because I'll use this immediately next. Okay. Okay, so that's all. So means I don't know whether we can go back to the previous thing. Let me see. We just do this. So the thing that we started with is this. That what is the square root of this thing? P1 square P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square. This, I can actually find a square root of this quantity. And I can linearize this square root in terms of P, linear in P, in this way. Just sigma I pi or sigma dot P, right? And this sigma need not be Pauli matrices in general. But the point is Pauli matrices satisfy this thing. And in 2 dimension, it's actually Pauli matrices because we'll discuss this thing also. So this square root can be evaluated, which is linear in P, and the only property this sigma I has to satisfy is that thing that this sigma I sigma j, half of sigma I sigma j plus sigma j sigma I has to be delta ij. This is the only property it has to satisfy, right? Whereas the Pauli matrices satisfy more this property plus one extra property or maybe few more extra property. Okay, the anti-commutation relation. Sorry, the commutation relation. By the way, this is called the anti-commutation relation, okay, because there is a plus sign. So there is a, for this purpose, this is enough. So half of this should be your delta ij. So this should be twice delta ij, right? And you already know that there already exists this kind of quantity which satisfy this property. And one of the example is actually the Pauli matrices. So in principle, there exists a solution, right? So I can in principle write this square root in this way because there exists at least one solution that I know, that these sigmas can be Pauli matrices which already satisfy this property. It in addition satisfies many other properties, but it at least satisfies this property, the sigma matrices. That's why we are calling it sigma. But the only thing that is necessary is this property, nothing else for these matrices, right? Once I can find this kind of matrices which satisfy this thing or any object, not necessarily matrix, which satisfy this property, it's enough to write down this square root in terms of that. Okay, so you should keep in mind that it's not necessarily always Pauli matrix. Okay, one possible case is Pauli matrix. Yeah.
Sir, Pauli matrices are 2 cross 2, but P is a column matrix in general. So how is this multiplication possible?
Which one is possible? I am saying here is you have to assume that there is an identity only. So what is the problem? This is not a column matrix. This is a number, right? There's some expression, some one component object, and there is the identity. You have to assume is any identity, because if you assume it's to be matrix, you have to assume there is identity operator, 2 by 2 identity matrix. If you assume this is a Pauli matrix, but if you do not use matrix, then it can be some other identity operator of other space, for which you get this kind of relation. Means if this sigma is some other kind of object which satisfy this thing, okay, some abstract quantity which satisfy this kind of object, then you need some identity of abstract identity operator. But if you assume that these are some matrices, 2 by 2 matrices or Pauli matrices, then you should put an identity matrix here. But what is the problem here? I don't get it. Means what is row vector and what is column vector?
Yes, Pauli matrices are 2 cross 2.
Exactly. So you have a 2 cross 2 matrix here, right? On this side, what is this expression? Sigma I dot pi. I is summed over. What is this expression? This is P3 in a basis in which sigma 3 is diagonal. This is P3, P1 plus IP2 perhaps, or minus IP2. The sign need to be checked. P1 plus IP2. You can check the sign. This is a 2 by 2 matrix, right? On the left hand side, right hand side. And this is a P1 minus IP2. Okay, minus P3. This is a 2 by 2 matrix on this side. And here also you have 2 by 2 matrix. This multiplied by identity matrix, right? Both sides you have matrix.
Actually, sir, I was saying that generally a vector is a column matrix 1 cross 3, but we have to take it.
A vector is a column matrix is not a correct statement. In fact, there are many representations of vector. In fact, I can actually represent a P vector which has a 3 component in a 2 by 2 matrix form also, and this is that.
No, sir, it's okay. We have done this.
Yeah, this is a vector, right? This has a 3 component, and all the 3 component will transform under rotation. You'll see as exactly same way as a 3 component vector, so to say, that you have deal with will transform. Right? But this is not object like this. P1, P2, P3. This is not a column vector. This is a vector in a different sense. This is a 2 by 2 matrix, right? This thing, whereas this thing is a column matrix. If you write it in this way, so there are many representations of a vector possible. This thing that you do normally is one kind of representation of a vector. This is another kind of representation of a vector. The magnitude, for example, of this vector is mod P1 square root of P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square. This is the magnitude of this thing. Right? The same magnitude can be also found from this. This will be the determinant of this matrix. The determinant of this 2 by 2 matrix would give the magnitude of the same vector. It will be exactly same, this and this. There is a 1-to-1 correspondence between them. Not 1-to-1, actually 1-to-1, I guess, into, okay, correspondence between these 2 representations. But anyway, the problem that you were saying that Pi is a vector and sigma is a 2 by 2 matrix, none of this is a concern here as a mathematical equation. Because this side I have a 2 by 2 matrix, on this side I also have a 2 by 2 matrix like this. So this is a consistent mathematical equation, okay? And these Pi's are actually not, right now is actually component of a vector, means I'm not writing my Pi in this way. I'm writing this whole thing in this way, sigma I dot Pi. My Pi is still this object, okay, P1, P2, P3. Means the Pi, not the Pi, the P is actually this thing, and Pi, individually they're actually a component of this full vector. So I equal to 1 means P1, I equal to 2 means P2. So in general, each of these Pi is actually a real number, okay. They are neither vector, the component of a vector, and component of a vector is some real number, okay. It can be complex number, but here since they are momentum, they are real number. And we are basically multiplying a matrix with a real number. Is that okay? Here also this quantity is a real number, right? Square root of P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square. All them are real numbers. So their sum is all square is real number. Their sum is real number. Their square root is a real number. And if you multiply an identity matrix with a real number, you would still get a 2 by 2 matrix which is proportional to identity. Is that okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So the main motivation of doing this thing is this. So if you have an object of this kind, you can linearize it, right? In this way, using some matrices. One of the examples is Pauli matrices, which satisfy this property, right? So the Dirac took this identity very seriously and then considered a similar approach. The only thing that we have to do is this. So now we have this quantity, square root of P1 square plus P2 square plus P3 square plus M square. There is one more extra object here. So can we do the similar thing and linearize it in P? This is what is the motivation is. Okay. Is that okay? So this is the form that Dirac took. It's exactly the same thing. It's like H equal to sigma dot P. If you do not have the M, it's exactly H equal to sigma dot P, right? But since you have extra M, he just wrote it in this way, H equal to alpha dot P plus some beta M. So some extra matrices. Or maybe extra object. I do not say matrix. I don't know whether they are matrix or not. Okay. But anyway, whatever you do, you just linearize it in P and just then check whether the square of this thing gives you the same expression or not. H equal to P square plus M square. Okay. So this is all these things I am doing in C equal to 1 units. Okay. Means I am assuming I have already set C equal to 1. Maybe in the next class I have to mention the convention and notation. But yeah. There is no C. Okay. I just assume C to be 1. So let's check again. So let's do the square. You have this expression H operator, which is this. So let's square that. If you square this thing, you have to multiply this with the same thing. Again, if you do that, you will get alpha I, alpha j, pi, pj from here. This multiplied by this, and then you will have this object multiplied by beta m. So alpha I, pi, beta m. So I take m common, alpha I, beta times pi. Also, you will get beta times alpha j. And pjm, if you multiply this by this, but I can just change the indices because this time there is only one index, right? J, I can make it just simply I. So I take the m common, so this becomes alpha I beta plus beta alpha I times pi, and the last expression is beta square m square. That's it, right? So if you compare this with h square equal to p square plus m square, right? This is the actual operator, h square. This is relativistic expression, right? There is no problem with that. Your h was square root of that. That's a different thing. But this is perfectly, there is no objection to this thing. H square is p square plus m square. In fact, this is consequence of h square is equal to p square plus m square. Okay? So if you compare this expression of h square, this is your h square, starting from this, with this thing, exactly in a similar way that we did for the sigma matrices, what is the condition that you get? You get something like this, right? But again, this is, I should say, alpha ij is not exactly equal to delta ij. I just wrote it as, I should actually put a question mark. I should just a minute. Yeah. Oh, sorry. So if you compare this equation term by term, you expect that this to be your delta ij, so that you get a p square from here and it matches with this. This beta square should be identity so that it becomes m square. And this bracketed quantity should be 0 because there is no linear term in pi here, right? That's the thing. So these are the three conditions that you get, right? From this, comparing this with this. Now the question is, can we find some solution of this three equation? Okay, is this possible to satisfy, or is this possible to find some alpha betas? Some alpha beta, any alpha beta. If you can find one alpha beta, means one set of alpha beta, you may have more than one set of alpha beta, infinite number of alpha beta in principle, but we don't know whether the solution is unique or not also. But at least if I can find one set of alpha i's and beta, which satisfy all these three properties, then we are done. I can linearize this expression, right, in this way. Is this statement clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So just a quick thing that this thing is not exactly equal to delta ij pi pj. What is exactly is delta ij is this thing. So alpha ij you can always write in this way, as I explained already, as a symmetric part and anti-symmetric part. And since your pi pj is symmetric in ij, if you multiply this with pi pj, okay, this thing vanishes already, right? So you are left with alpha I alpha j, means the symmetric combination of it multiplied by pi pj, and this should be your delta ij pi pj, right? This thing should be your delta ij pj. So basically the condition is alpha I alpha j has to this matrices alpha ij has to satisfy something similar to what we already got, something similar to the Pauli matrices. So one possible case might be the Pauli matrices is the solution already, right? One possibility. That because the Pauli matrices satisfy this thing that we already know, right? But in addition, we need to find something that also satisfy. So we need to find a beta whose square is actually identity and which satisfy which anti-commutes with the alpha i's. That you have to find. Is that okay? So this is okay. This we know what kind of object can satisfy this, but we have to find another object or another matrix. If this is Pauli matrix, then this beta has to be also some matrix, 2 by 2 matrix. Then that square has to be identity, and that matrix should anti-commute with alpha I, right? So this is the target that we have to follow. Is this okay? Yeah, I'll just switch to another node, but let's just skip this thing. So the property that we need to, this is the fundamental property, and we'll derive many other corollary from this. But this is the basic thing. It's completely independent of any other facts. It's just follow this from this. If you assume that your H is linearized in this way, and if it has to square to this kind of thing, all this alpha beta has to satisfy this thing. Okay. And one more thing that we have to also assume that alpha beta is independent of x and p, because otherwise, if your alpha if your alpha depends on p, for example, then the problem is you cannot actually, your whole purpose is lost, right? Means you want something that is linear in p. Means you have only one, so you later on at the position basis you will replace this p with the grad, and then you will have on the left hand side you will have IH cross del del t, and you will have only one gradient operator on this side. Okay, so this thing will be there. And also one thing that I have also assumed here, that the alpha I and pi commutes. Okay, I have assumed this has to be assumed, and since alpha I pi has to commute, then this thing, this alpha cannot be function of x as well, because p cannot commute with function of x. So this alpha beta everything should be independent of x and t. So it should be some pure constant, means independent of x and p and all this. But still satisfy this kind of thing expression. Is that okay? If it is possible to find some alpha beta, then it's perfectly fine. Then we are done. We can linearize it in this way, and we can substitute this Hamiltonian here, and that is your Dirac equation. That's it. IH cross del psi del t equal to alpha dot p plus beta m acting on psi. This is your Dirac equation. In fact, that is your Dirac equation. We'll see that. Okay. Any questions so far? Hello?
So, how do we know that this linearization is physically acceptable?
Physically acceptable means what? Means why you're saying?
Just
physically acceptable means you have to check a lot of things, right? There are a lot of physical observation you have to check. Just like we got a Klein-Gordon equation. It's perfectly Lorentz covariant, right? But whether that is physically acceptable or not, we have checked, right? Step by step. We did whether there is a well-defined probabilistic interpretation or not. Whether this there are maybe the energy eigenvalues are real or imaginary. All these things we could have checked. The energy eigenvalue we didn't bother about to check because the probability density was not even positive definite. So we stopped at that level. So this is one of the physical quantity we checked. Then we can check actually, for example, whether the solution has real or not, or the solution means the energy eigenvalues are real or not, or maybe the energy eigenvalues are positive or negative, or only positive, or positive or negative both. So this is a very serious issue in relativity. We'll come to this issue time and again. Okay, I just hold on to that point. But I guess by physically acceptable or not, by that statement you mean this, right? Whether this equation makes sense or not, right?
Yes, yes, except from just mathematics, actually.
Yeah, so far it's actually, what you got actually, that it's mathematically consistent, it's linear in P, so it can have a single time derivative, single special derivative. Okay, so you can hope that it has a, it will transform under Lorentz transformation as a Lorentz covariant way, but it's not straightforward. Okay, I just warn you that it's not always straightforward. Just having a single time derivative and single special derivative doesn't guarantee that it will transform as a Lorentz covariant, transform in Lorentz covariant way. We have to explicitly check that also. Okay, but this is our purpose, that we should have a single time derivative, and to at least ensure that there will be Lorentz covariance, we should also have a single special derivative. So that we have achieved that thing. That's the statement. I'm not saying that this equation is a perfectly valid single particle relativistic quantum mechanical equation. I'm not claiming that statement yet. Okay, so we got an equation at least. Now we'll check many things. Okay, we'll first see the probabilistic interpretation at least. Okay.
Okay, sir.
And then if the probabilistic interpretation, if you can pass that test, then we'll go to further test the energy eigenvalues and so on for a given problem and so on. Okay, at least for free particle that should make sense, right? Yeah. So any other question? So yeah, we'll come to that physical making of, means whether this makes any physical sense or means physically sensible or not. We'll come back to this question again. So far we just got an equation. Okay. So but in fact not yet, means I have not got yet the equation because I have to find some alpha beta that satisfy this equation, and the only answer I can, or a hint I can give you, that the sigma matrices are not enough. Okay, so I'll come to that anyway. So I have to find some alpha beta which satisfy this. If I can find, then this is my H, and I have to just substitute this H in this equation, and this is the real. Then that will be the direct equation. The answer is that sigmas are not the solution, and another answer is there is a solution. So that means this can be my Hamiltonian at least, and then I can at least write down a relativistic quantum mechanical equation, and then I'll check its consistency. Okay. Okay, so let me just quickly switch. So these are the properties. Just keep this in mind. I'll come to this. Okay. Okay. I have to combine these notes. Maybe all of them I will not be able to write it in my own hand. So I have to. Some of them will be my handwritten note, and some of them will be actually this note taken by Devarun. But I also don't refer that you take or read it as a whole, because there are a lot of mistakes already in terms of statement and also in terms of equations. So I have to correct them, and then only if there is something correct I can. So I will combine my notes and this note, and I have to also write something by myself separately, and then so I'll give it as a step by step, one lecture at a time. Maybe next I shared this lecture, whatever I discussed today, maybe today or tomorrow. So you can look at that. You can in principle look at this. This is available to many of in this case already. So you can look at it, but you should be careful. There are some mistakes are there. In fact, there was something because this is done in class, so there was something that has been corrected, but so all of them are there. So you don't know which one is correct, which one is not correct. Okay, so you should be careful always. That is always true for any class note. Okay, so these are the relation that we got. Beta square should be identity. Alpha I beta plus beta alpha I should be 0, means they anti-commute, right? Means alpha I beta should be minus beta alpha I. This is what it means, anti-commute. And this is also some anti-commutation relation. Different alpha I means if I not equal to j, then this should be 0, right? Because if I not equal to j, then the delta ij is 0. On this side you have 0. So for example, alpha 1, alpha 2 should anti-commute. I mean, alpha 1, alpha 2 should be minus of alpha 2, alpha 1. This is the consequence of this equation and so on. And also you can see if I equal to j, what do you get if I equal to j? These are not summed over indices, right? So this is free indices. Anyway, this is already, anyway, there is no repeated index, so it's free index. So if I equal to j, no summation, what happens?
Alpha equal to identity.
Alpha I square equal to identity. Very good. So for each I, right? Means alpha 1 square is identity, alpha 2 square is identity, alpha 3 square is identity. And also beta square is identity, that you already got. So you have to find some matrices. How many matrices you have to find? If you represent this relation by matrix, so this cannot be solved, this cannot be achieved by some constant real number, right? Or real parameter, right? Because real parameter, they always commute. They never anti-commute. They always commute. It can be achieved by some other parameter, not necessarily matrix. Some other parameter, these are called other variable. These are called Grassmannian variable, but we don't know that right now. So this kind of relation can be achieved using Grassmannian variable, but their square is actually 0. Their square is not identity. That's the problem. Okay, but you can achieve this and this. So basically, the Grassmannian variable is this. They are not real variable. They satisfy this kind of relation. Okay, for as many number you can choose. Means ij can run from 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to n, whatever it is. They can satisfy this kind of, not this kind of relation. This just alpha I alpha j plus alpha j alpha equal to 0. No, there is no delta ij. Okay, so their square is also 0. Okay, so that's not already the basis of the 2 by 2 matrix space. Their square is identity, so this is nice. Means they would have satisfied this thing. So alpha I could have been the sigma I is itself, but it's very hard to get a beta which also anti-commutes with the sigmas. So you need another kind of sigma matrices that's anti-commute with the rest of the sigmas. Means I need 4 matrices which anti-commutes with each other, which is not possible in 2 dimension. Okay, so I have to go to a higher dimension. By the way, so this is clear, right? In 1 dimension it's not possible. 1 dimension with 1 dimension numbers it's not possible. 2 dimension matrices it's not possible. So the thing is that we can go to maybe higher dimension. So what are the higher dimension? So before we go to higher dimension, let's just check few more properties. By the way, the square of beta square is identity, right? So what are the eigenvalues of these matrices then? Also alpha I square is identity. So what are their eigenvalues?
Plus minus 1.
Plus minus 1. Very good. Yeah. So you can alpha I square equal to identity, beta square is equal to identity, right? So the square is identity. So their eigenvalue should be plus minus 1. You can also check this. Since alpha I beta anti-commutes, means since this is true, alpha I beta plus beta alpha is 0. You can check this. Then alpha I beta should be minus beta alpha I. Okay. So you can multiply by beta throughout. So then on this side you have beta alpha I beta. On this side you have minus alpha I because beta square is identity. And you take a trace on both sides. Okay. If you take a trace, on this side you have minus trace of alpha I, and on this side you have trace of beta alpha I beta. On the trace you can make a cyclic rotation on, okay, and it will be actually alpha I beta beta. Again beta square is identity, so this becomes trace of alpha I. So trace of alpha I is equal to minus trace of alpha I. So you take, so it should be 0, right? Means you take it on the same side. So twice trace of alpha I is 0, then trace of alpha is 0. So this says that the trace of alpha matrices is 0. And by similar argument, you can show that the trace of beta is also 0. You have to just multiply, you have to just take this same equation and you have to multiply it by alpha I throughout. Okay. From this side or this side, whatever you want. And you can similarly show that trace of beta is 0. So the trace of these are traceless matrices. Okay. One more thing I forgot to mention, perhaps forgot to check. Okay, yeah, I'll come back to that. So these are traceless matrices. And one can also check from this thing, if your H is Hermitian, what is that expression? Yeah, this is your H, right? This is my H. H is alpha dot p plus beta. If your H is Hermitian, then you take the dagger of this thing, right? And if it has to be H, then since p is already Hermitian, you can check that alpha beta, all the alpha i's and beta has to be Hermitian. Okay, so this is one more property, which is also fundamental. Means apart from these three properties, 1, 2, and 3. This is also fundamental that H is Hermitian. Hermiticity of H gives you that these alpha betas are Hermitian. Okay. And these are some corollary that alpha I square is identity and trace of alpha I is 0, trace of beta is 0. Now, you already know that the eigenvalues are plus minus 1, right? These are the only eigenvalues. And their trace is 0. So what are the allowed dimension of these matrices then? Can you achieve this in odd dimension? Can it be 3 by 3 matrices, 5 by 5 matrices? If the eigenvalues are 0, plus 1 and minus 1 only, and if your trace has to be 0, then all these eigenvalues should appear in pair, right? Plus 1 and minus 1.
No, sir. Odd order are not possible because.
So then odd dimension is not possible because in odd dimension with plus 1 and minus 1 eigenvalue, you cannot make trace to be 0, right? So only dimension where you can make this trace to 0 with plus minus 1 eigenvalues is even dimension, right? So one possibility could have been the 2 dimension, but in 2 dimension you do not have 4 anti-commuting matrices. So what you can do, you can go to higher dimension, but higher even dimension. So the next best option is the 4 dimension. Okay, so you have to find some matrices in 4 dimension. Some 4 by 4 matrices, some set of 4 by 4 matrices which satisfy this relation. Okay, this 3 relation and also Hermitian. Is that okay? If we can find that in 4 dimension, that's enough. Okay, in 4 dimension there are many matrices, so it's possible, should be possible in principle. Okay, and in fact the answer is yes, there are some matrices which satisfy this relation, which also at least we can find some 4 and set of anti-commuting matrices which satisfy this relation in 4 dimension. If you go to higher dimension, it's also possible, but what you will prefer is the minimalistic approach. So we'll be in minimal dimension. So we'll restrict ourselves to 4 dimension. In principle, one can go to high dimension, but in fact, these are also consistent with many things, with Lorentz invariance and also many other things. In fact, these higher dimensional matrices are actually various other higher dimensional representation of the Lorentz transformation. But we will not bother about those details right now. We'll come back to that perhaps sometimes. I don't know that it's what is the correct time. I guess when we will be discussing the Lorentz group, we'll perhaps discuss a little bit about that. But other than that, we'll not bother about the dimension higher than 4. Okay, we'll mostly restrict ourselves to 4 dimension. We just need some solution of this equation. So we need at least one solution that satisfies this thing, and then we are done. Okay. But even in 4 dimension, we'll see there are more than one solution. Okay, and they are all related. But anyway. So the 2 things is clear that in 2 dimension this is not possible to achieve because in 2 dimension you do not have 4 anti-commuting matrices. We only have 3 anti-commuting matrices. These are Pauli matrices. And another thing is that these matrices, these are traceless Hermitian matrices with square is identity. Their eigenvalues is plus minus 1. So these matrices must be 4-dimensional matrices. Okay. So next task is how to find these matrices, this set of 4 matrices. Okay. So we'll do this in the next class. Is this okay? We'll stop here today and then we'll start from this point. So the next task is to find these matrices. That will be done in the next class. Once we find the matrices, we already have the properties. So we have the unless we get the matrix, we cannot study this equation either. Because this equation IH cos del psi del t equal to H psi, where H is this, to study whether this equation makes any sense or not, we need to know what is the alpha beta, means what is the explicit representation of the alpha beta to explicitly solve this equation. Okay. So we'll first find the alpha beta and then we'll explicitly solve the equation, which is Dirac equation. So we are yet to write down the explicit equation. Okay. So we'll stop here today and we'll start from this point. Next time means on Tuesday. Is this okay?
Okay, sir.
Okay. So yeah. If you have any question, you can ask or you can go back and read. And one warning I should give all of you, whether it's a open note exam or closed note exam, it will be 100% probability that it will be open note exam, but you should not take it as a something of some comfort fact that it will be very easy. Both the exam and the subject. You should go back every day and read it, otherwise you'll forget. Because everything is new. You have not many properties related to many identities involving alpha matrices, beta matrices, many new notation, many new things will be there. Unless you do it right now, you will not be able to remember any of these things. Or when you will do it during the time of exam, you'll find that you forgot everything. Okay, and also it's not very easy. Even if it's open note exam, it's not very easy to find. So to give an answer of the question and look at the note, which part of this note has these things. You will not be able to locate that thing, or what thing you have to write means to answer this question, because you don't have to derive all of these things. Whatever is there in the note you can use directly. Only thing is that you have to do the remaining step maybe, but you unless you know everything, you will not be able to do that. In fact, open note exam is actually a bit problematic in that sense. In fact, I have a experience which is not good, means that's why I was preferring closed note exam, but this time it's not possible either. Because of this thing that since it's open note exam, that the note will be there and we'll be able to write from that note. It's not like that. It's very difficult. Okay.
Hello,
Okay.
sir.
Yeah.
Will you send the PDFs? Means
PDF. Okay. I'll combine this either today or tomorrow. Okay. Or maybe hopefully
Okay.
I can send today maybe, but let's see. Okay. Or today,
Okay.
tomorrow. Okay. The video you can find it. Shivam will share it maybe with you. Shivam, can you
Okay,
share
sir.
it by email to this
Yes,
thread, the
yes.
same thread? Okay.
Yeah, sure. I will send everyone the.
Put my email address also, because I need a copy of this videos also.
Sure.
And also check this.
Sir?
Yeah. Hello.
Sir, can you explain once again why the alpha and beta matrices should be 4-dimensional or even dimensional?
Yeah. So you see that their square is identity, right? If a matrix square is identity, then their eigenvalues are +1 and -1. Okay. Now, in addition to that, these matrices are also traceless. Now, can you arrange this +1, -1 eigenvalue in odd dimension so that the trace is 0?
Yeah, right. It should be even number of them.
Yeah, so in even dimension, you can arrange 1 +, 1 minus, or 3 +1 and 3 -1, whatever you mean. Ordering doesn't matter. They occur in pair, right? +1 -1, +1 -1, and the trace is 0. If they are the only eigenvalues. But in odd dimension, either you choose 1 plus, let's say 3 dimension. You have +1 +1 1 minus 1, or 1 + 1 2 minus 1.
It's 5 o'clock.
That is the best we can do, right? And it's the trace is not 0. Unless you have the other. If you have eigenvalue, all other eigenvalue allowed. For example, if you have eigenvalue 2, for example, then you can do maybe +1, 2 + 1 and 1 minus 2, perhaps, if these are the eigenvalues. But then in 3 dimension, you can have traceless matrices. But the eigenvalues actually restrict that. Here, the eigenvalues are only +-1, and the trace is 0. The only way you can do that is actually in even. Okay.
Okay, sir.
If the eigenvalues are not +1, then it's not true. It's only true it is traceless and eigenvalues are +-1. Okay. Or at least they comes in a pair. Maybe +-2 also possible. If, for example, alpha square is 4, not identity, but 4 times identity, then the eigenvalues would have been +-2. Then also it's true. So basically, the statement is that if the eigenvalues comes in a pair, means just like +-1 or +-I or +-2, something like that. If the eigenvalue comes in a pair, and if the matrix is traceless, then you have to be in an even dimension. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so we'll stop today. Okay.